Welcome to more World of Warplanes content from the Noble Queue, and in this video I'm going to look at the new Tier 6 reward aircraft, the American heavy fighter, the P-38L Lightning. Hello there, and if you're watching this in July of 2022, the chances are you've recently acquired this aircraft or are currently working through a chain of combat missions to receive it as a reward. And it's one of the most distinctive airframes of World War II, that of the Lightning. This variant is the P-38L Lightning, which was the variant produced in the greatest number. And true to the early versions of this aircraft, the World of Warplanes team have given it 7 rockets under each wing, mounted on pylons. They've also given it 2 bombs and some fairly light armament, more on that in the setup section. They've also produced a special livery for it, which you can see here. More on that in the setup section as well. Listen out. What we're going to do next though, is look at the statistics of the aircraft, which of course means looking at a spreadsheet. If you don't want to look at that spreadsheet, use a link below the video to go to another part of it. Here we have the spreadsheet with all of the Tier 6 heavies. With the advent of the P-38L Lightning, there are 8 of them. I'm going to take a moment to explain how this spreadsheet works. If you know that already, feel free to skip ahead to the discussion of the statistics themselves. So we have in column C and D the P-38L Lightning, and then each of the other heavies has 2 columns of its own off to the right, as you can see here. Down the left, we have the information that you can see in the hangar UI, and in the case of the armament, it's been supplemented by information from a third-party website for the auto-aim angle, the dispersion angle, and the overheat time. As far as colour coding is concerned, green indicates a best-in-class figure, light blue is second best-in-class, light purple third best-in-class, and a gold colour behind the name of the aircraft indicates that it's a premium or a reward plane, and of course the P-38L Lightning is a reward plane. Good measure. And using red colours, we reverse the logic for worst-in-class figures. Now, for the purposes of the comparison, the configuration was taken back to stock in every case. Ordnance where available was mounted, which has an impact on speed and manoeuvrability, remember. Equipment was removed, pilot was sent back to the barracks, and the modules were all top. Okay, so let's look at the statistics of the aircraft. So let's start with the armament, and what we have is one 20mm cannon, and that happens to be the same as on the Grumman XP50, except that that has 2 of them. It's identical in terms of its statistics, and 3 15mm machine guns, the T-70s. These are new to the game. They don't appear on any other aircraft. And these combined give a rating of 20 and a cumulative DPS of 345. Well, let's drop down to the worst in class figures, and immediately we can see this is second worst in class on both counts. Only the Grumman XP50 is more lightly armed heavy fighter. And that makes one of the class specific missions for heavy fighters, that of shooting down bombers and ground attack aircraft, a little bit tricky with this plane. We'll talk about what you might do about that in the setup. The range on the guns is pretty good, 2300 feet. Could be longer, but this is fine. And both guns are blessed with an excellent dispersion angle. Now, dispersion angle is how quickly the bullets spread out as they leave the muzzle of the gun or cannon, and it's 0.4 in both cases, which are very good figures. And if, for instance, we look at the Volti, we can see that it's 0.6 for its big guns, and for its 50 cals, it's 0.8. However, the dispersion angle is a fairly miserly 2 in both cases. And again, if we look at the Volti, we can see that the dispersion angle is offset by the auto-aim angle of 3.5 degrees and 5 degrees for the machine guns. The auto-aim angle is how far you can be off target before the game corrects where you're aiming to make sure that you actually hit the aircraft. So obviously, the bigger the auto-aim angle, the better. Overheat time, I did say that the statistics were identical for the XP50's cannons, but in fact there is one difference. The overheat time is 10 seconds, which is very healthy on this 20mm cannon, as opposed to 8 on the Grumman XP50, and a good long 20 seconds on the 15mm. But there's no getting away from it. This is pretty lightly armed. If we look at the heaviest hitting aircraft, the ME-410 Hornets, we can see that we've got a rating of 36 and 600 cumulative DPS. So the lesson here is, if you're going up against other heavies, even tier 6s, you don't want to stay in a head-on for very long, if at all. What you want to do is either try and evade and speed away if you can, or use your manoeuvrability against less manoeuvrable heavies such as the ME-410 Hornets. There's no defensive armament, this is a single-seater aircraft. So let's come on to the ordnance, and we have an eye-catching figure here. The rating is 33, clearly the best in class on this page, outdoing even the previous holders of that accolade, the two Mosquitoes over here, which have a rating of 23 each. It's not quite as clear-cut as that, though. We have two 500-pound bombs, which are capable of doing damage of 8,600 all together. And that's the same as the P-38L Lightning. And indeed, the Mosquitoes have pretty much the same layout as well. And then we have 14 5-inch rockets with cumulative damage of 16,800. That outstrips, of course, the P-38L Lightning. It's the same rockets, but it only has 10 of them. And the Mosquitoes only have 8 rockets, capable of doing only 8,000 damage cumulatively each. However, notice the reload times. 180 seconds, that's a full 3 minutes for the bombs, and even worse, 240 seconds for the rockets, whereas the Mosquitoes have 120 seconds for each of their pieces of ordnance. And what this means is that the P-38L Lightning isn't quite as devastating in ground attack as otherwise it might be. More on that in a moment. When we come to survivability, there isn't much in theory between any of the heavies. The Grumman XP50 is actually the most vulnerable aircraft here. And the Lightnings, in theory, are somewhere in the middle. Well, because you will be tempted to use your ordnance, you're going to be putting this aircraft in harm's way far more often than you might some of your other heavies if you tend to concentrate on flying high and fast. And that means that this survivability actually feels worse than its rating of 9. However, I will point out that the damage resistance is pretty good at 50, and there's a good fire resistance figure at 65. Airspeed, very similar to the P-38L Lightning. So it's rated at second best in class, unfortunately behind the Pestilence that is the Volti XP54. But you can do quite a lot with these figures if you choose the boost max speed and the cruise speed. Talk about that shortly. Boost duration is quite interesting. Let's take it at 25 seconds, which in theory is second best in class but also worst in class, but then there's only either 30 seconds or 25 seconds on the boost for the heavies, so that's not meaningful. But what is meaningful is this dive speed. 559, and no other heavy other than the XP54, the Volti, can approach that speed. So in most cases, if you're caught out by a heavy behind you, your escape method, if you're not low to the ground, is to dive as fast as you can to get away from it. When it comes to manoeuvrability, remember the ordnance is mounted, so in theory it's slightly worse than the P-38L Lightning. If you take the ordnance off, obviously this figure goes up. But the difference is fairly marginal. It's 13.8 seconds as opposed to 13.7 seconds to turn 360 degrees. Again, the Volti is best in class here. Also, you need to watch out for the KI-102, which will also dance around you if you try and engage it in a turn fight. And you'd have to be fairly careful with the Grumman XP50 as well, which potentially can outturn you. So although it is fairly manoeuvrable, when you're up against other heavies, only the ME-410 Hornets can you be sure of outturning at altitude, and down low you will outturn the Mosquitoes. And the altitude performance is 61, which is best in class. The maximum optimum altitude is exactly the same as the P-38J, and indeed so is the ceiling. The climb rate is slightly worse because of the extra rockets, I guess, 356. This is third best in class, and the only other aircraft which appreciably is faster at climbing is the Grumman XP50. I mean, that's its speciality, climbing fast. As far as the other heavies are concerned, here's your escape method potentially from the Volti. Climb straight up and hope that the chap behind you or the lady behind you is not very good at aiming as they go upwards. And as you can see, There are some fairly poor climb figures here from some of the other aircraft, so bear that in mind. You might be able to climb away from a heavy as well as dive away from it. If we look at the worst in class figures, what can we glean from those? Well, we've already talked about the gun armament. The survivability figures are pretty compressed, so we don't need to worry about the red there. Boost duration, well, there's either 25 or 30. This aircraft happens to have 25. We don't need to worry about that either. The stall speed, well, okay. Don't often find that's a factor in my games. If it's a factor for you, then watch out. You've got the worst in class stall speed here. So where does this place this aircraft? Tricky one. This aircraft, I think, is going to be an aircraft that good players will know how to fly well and get good results from. Decent players like myself will occasionally do pretty well in it and sometimes struggle. And newer players of the game, people who are learning the game, are going to find this a real handful and probably won't do too well in it most of the time. And the reason being is it's not a classic air superiority heavy because it doesn't have the firepower to fulfill that role. But given the ordnance, the temptation is to spend most of your time near the ground. Well, that exposes you to harm, and this aircraft is pretty fragile. That said, this ordnance is more than enough to flip, for instance, a mining plant on its own, and you'll have some ordnance left over, probably, to go and attack a second sector, but probably not enough to flip that second sector. And here's the critical thing. Because the reload times are so long, it means that this aircraft is not going to be an overpowered version of a ground attacker. You're going to have to be patient before you can flip your second sector, whilst you wait for the bombs and the rockets to reload. And that means that probably in between the use of the ordnance, you're going to have to try and return to the classic air superiority role and get high and look for isolated targets. And maybe if you improve the DPS, and I'll show you how, actually go looking for those bombers and ground attackers. So we've returned to the tarmac outside my hangar, and before I talk about how I set this aircraft up, I'm going to talk about the livery. And you get a special one with this aircraft, which is good because it's free. However, there's a problem. And the problem is that this awarded paint scheme gives you 5% aircraft experience. Well, you may consider that to be quite useful when you're trying to get it specialised. And indeed, when you have it specialised and you've ticked accelerate crew training here, it will help you train up a pilot more quickly. However, this aircraft, I've mentioned, is fairly fragile for a heavy. And with the amount of ordnance that it carries, you're more than likely to spend time near the floor trying to use the ordnance, and I found that it tends to get ripped apart by the AA. So if you have the gold or credits, then I strongly suggest that you drop this paint scheme in favour of one of these two here, either the seasonal camo, which will give you 10% tolerance to damage from AA guns, and indeed a 5% tolerance to damage from rear gunners, as well as 20% concealment, or, failing that, the universal paint scheme, which can be used for all of the seasonal slots, which will give you 10% concealment and 5% tolerance to AA guns. In my case, I've chosen to put on, as you can see, I have already purchased this with gold, the seasonal camos to gain that extra protection. And as far as the nose art and the emblem are concerned, well, the nose art is fine. 5% crew experience there, that's nice, keep that. It's a nice looking nose art in my opinion. The emblem, however, is only the standard 2% crew experience, which is not trying to show me. There we go, finally got it up. 2% crew experience. If you have the 7th anniversary emblem, swap it out for that one. And the 7th anniversary emblem is this one, what I call the Lucky 7. And the reason for that is that gives you another 5% aircraft experience, which of course, when you've got Accelerate Crew Training ticked, becomes crew training. Okay, let's talk about setup on the aircraft. And when you get this aircraft initially, let's look at the stock configuration. You've got 4 equipment slots, but 1 is locked, and that's on the engine, and 5 consumable slots, and again, 1 is locked again on the engine. My aircraft is specialised, I splashed out the token so I could get it immediately specialized and work with it in that configuration. Let's pop it back into specialist configuration and let's see what I've done with it. And no surprises in the cockpit slot. I've mounted a gun sight for accuracy, and this is an experimental piece of equipment. And in terms of the bonus characteristics, I've worked on the basis that with low DPS guns, and these have a base of 345 damage per second, if you remember the section in the numbers on the armament, it's best to actually try and do a little bit extra somehow to targets that you're shooting at. And in this case, with the bonus characteristics, you can inflict critical damage or cause a fire, i.e. cripple your opponent, which is helpful. And therefore I've selected off a total of 17% chance, extra chance of inflicting critical damage. Bear in mind this is experimental equipment, so the bonuses are slightly different to the standard equipment. And a 10% chance of causing a fire, and that's the way I would go with the gun sight, even if it's a piece of standard equipment. There's no equipment slot for the airframe, so there's nothing that can be done there. So now we come on to the engines, and this is an interesting topic. What I have here is a boost mixture injection system to improve the boost speed, and an uprated engine to improve the cruise speed of the aircraft. And the effects of these, their ultimate level equipments, are as follows. The cruise speed is 323, and the base speed that we had was 307, and the boost speed is 414. And if I get this equipment fully calibrated, the boost injection system, I reckon that probably go up to 425. And as far as the uprated engine is concerned, we've probably got another 20 or so miles an hour to be able to put on the top there as well, which would make this a pretty rapid and pacey aircraft. And I've played this aircraft quite a bit, and this is the way that I like to play it. I like it to be fast. Your alternative is to drop one of these two pieces of equipment, and usually I would drop the uprated engine first, because that negatively impacts your resistance to fire. The base figure is 65, we're already down to 50 here, and this aircraft does catch fire quite a bit, I've noticed, with this particular configuration. So much so that if I were training up a pilot, and we'll talk about this in pilot skills, I might consider actually putting on some of the firefighting skills down here so that I could retain this first aid kit. And what could you drop this for? Well, the lightweight power unit. And if we get the lightweight power unit on, this is an ultimate level piece of equipment as well. Yeah, I've got lots of equipment lying around, I know. Now, if we look at manoeuvrability, the base rating has gone up to 44, and the average time to turn 360 degrees is 13.1. And if you like flipping your heavies around, you might consider the lightweight power unit to be your better option. But of course, it comes with the penalty of airspeed. Personally, I think if I'm going to use a lightweight power unit, this is the way round that I would do it, because I've got the high cruise speed. However, I noticed with this configuration, I was constantly running out of boost, and that indicated to me that I felt the aircraft was sluggish, particularly when it was going between sectors. Now, again, if we look ahead to pilot skills, there is a skill here which can help you with getting between sectors, the cruise flight skill. But that's not a skill I particularly use a lot. In fact, I'm not sure I've got it mounted on any pilot. Sorry, I don't think I've got any pilot trained with cruise flight at all in the game. But it's something to consider. Which then led me to consider that maybe doing it the other way around and keeping the uprated engine and taking off the boost mixture injection system was the right way to go. Well, let's just have a look at the effects of this particular combination. We can see that we've lost 9 miles an hour off the cruise speed and a couple of miles an hour off the boost speed. Probably, and that's because of the bonus characteristics I had on the uprated engine, incidentally. So, not too bad. This is a workable configuration, but as I say, you'll need to be careful with your boost and not overuse it, otherwise you might find you haven't got it when you really want it. And just a reminder, if you want to test out any of these different configurations, you don't have to spend these 3 tokens if you've already got your equipment up to ultimate level. You can go into a battle under these test conditions here. Just remember that. So if we put this back, in fact we can just press reset, and now we drop this boost mixture injection system and put on the lightweight power unit. What are the effects? Well, if we just look at airspeed first, we've gone up again on the cruise speed because we've now got the upgraded engine, of course, but the boost speed has dropped to 23, and of course the manoeuvrability is still going to be rated at 44. And I've flown the aircraft like this as well, and it's workable. I didn't particularly notice the boost speed loss. However, there is another hidden impact of not using the boost mixture injection system, and that is that your rate of climb falls back towards the base, which is 356, and it's slightly improved to 366 here. There are going to be situations where you do miss that particular benefit of another 48 feet per second. So for the moment at least, I've settled on this combination as being my preferred combination. I haven't missed the lack of manoeuvrability. I have liked the fact that I'm pretty fast even when I'm cruising, and I like the improved rate of climb, and I like the extra speed when I'm boosting as well. And I've selected off the characteristics, pretty usual bonus characteristics on the injection system here. I've picked off both of the engine cooldown rates, so I've got a total of 15%. The engines come back so that they can be used again for boosting more quickly. And to offset the negative 18% boost availability there in red, I've selected off the 5% boost availability, which reduces that figure overall to minus 13%. Interestingly, I've managed to only lose 1 second off the boost duration. The base is 25, and what with the careful use of the bonus characteristics, it's only dropped to 24. You would have expected that to be around 22, 23, but it's not. As far as the uprated engine is concerned, there are a number of characteristics here. You could pick off different ones. You might choose to emphasize cruise speed. You might very well go for that resistance to fire figure. That's an attractive characteristic and one I might consider in the future. But I'm happy at the moment with the increased boost speed, acceleration without boost, and indeed another 5% on the engine cooldown rate there. When it comes to the forward firing weapon, your choices are as follows. Reinforced bolt carriers to increase the burst length. Well, you've got 10 seconds on the cannon and 20 seconds on the 15mm, or I suppose I should call them 60 cals. I don't think this aircraft necessarily will benefit from an increase in burst length, so that's my least preferred choice. I did fly the aircraft for a while with the long gun barrels. Now, an ultimate level piece of equipment here will increase the range from just under 2,300 feet to something well in excess of 2,500 feet, which sounds attractive, but in practice I found it made very little difference. 2,300 feet is more than adequate for the way that I fly the aircraft. So that brought me to the gas-operated action, which initially I thought would be my least preferred choice, but now is definitely number one in my book, and the reason for it is fairly simple. You've got a cumulative DPS of 345, and this makes it quite difficult to take down bombers and attack aircraft. Well, if you put on the rate of fire equipment, the gas-operated action, that goes up to 390, which is a pretty significant increase. And with this equipment, I found that I can take on certainly Tier 6 bombers and Tier 6 ground attackers pretty successfully. And that is important because that is one of your class-specific missions. As far as bonus characteristics are concerned here, again, on the principle that I need to try and cripple my enemies as well as do damage to them because of the low DPS of the guns, I've opted for a 10% chance of causing a fire. And then I've also opted for a 10% cooldown rate of forward-firing offensive armament. Now, given that the long burst length, you might think that's an odd choice, but I promise you, if you're firing at bombers or ground attackers, particularly if they're Tier 7 versions of those aircraft, you probably will overheat your guns and you'll be glad to get them back just a little bit more quickly. And then I've also the principle that since this is a rate of fire equipment, why wouldn't you want to increase the rate of fire by a further 2.5%? You could look at perhaps picking off another cooldown, or you could look at accuracy if you want, but I think this is the correct set of choices for me. When it comes to consumables, I have mounted the first aid kit, and I still think this is the right choice, even though I've already mentioned that this aircraft in its current configuration does catch fire quite often, because there's nothing more frustrating than following a bomber or a ground attacker and having your pilot injured and being unable to land your shots, especially when you've got such low DPS anyway. If I get into a tight spot, I've mounted the pneumatic control assist to give me a little bit more manoeuvrability. So if I'm fighting against another P-38L or another Lightning, I might just get away with a better turn and winning the engagement as opposed to losing it with this piece of equipment. If you have any boost at all, the engine cooling will add 10 seconds to it. I think this is a mandatory consumable personally on fighters, heavy fighters, multi-role fighters. And I've opted for the engine restart. It's critical that if you're fleeing an aircraft, in my opinion, either going up or diving away, you can't afford to lose your engine, and therefore you will want to restart it if the engine is shot out. If you really want to try and maximize your speed, your choice here is the improved mixture control. And then finally, universal ammunition, which is my standard choice. However, I will say that if ever there were an argument for using gold ammunition, then you might choose to use it on low DPS guns, which is what the situation we've got here. However, we've got a mix, so you'd actually have to choose between incendiary ammunition, which would be good for the 60 cals or the 15mm machine guns, or the fragmentation ammunition, which would probably be good for the cannon. So given that there are 3 machine guns producing the majority of the damage, I'd probably go for the incendiary ammunition. But as you can see, once again, I have opted not to mount gold. Right, let's talk about pilot skills. And this is, being a reward aircraft, a crew trainer, and I wouldn't normally train a pilot for it specifically. Additional to that, I've got Mary Loveheart, a special pilot in this aircraft at the moment. I'll discuss why a little bit later. But if I were to train a pilot specifically for this aircraft, it would very much depend on what equipment I'd mounted, particularly for the engine, as to what skills I might go for first. So let's have a think about this. With the mix and boost injection mixture system and the uprated engine, there's a strong argument for prioritizing aerodynamics expert, which will improve the effect of that equipment by 40%, followed by Engine Guru 1 and Engine Guru 2. If I've got a different combination of equipment, perhaps the lightweight power unit, I might not prioritise Engine Guru 1 and Engine Guru 2 because I've already decided that I'm going to try and fling the aircraft about the sky a little bit rather than use out-and-out speed. There's a strong argument for actually getting Demolition Expert, which is unusual for a heavy pilot, but to get the best out of those bombs. And this leads me into the reason why I've got Mary Loveheart in this aircraft. Special skill of Mary Loveheart, she has 2 of them, but one of them is Valkyrie's Wrath. And that means that rockets and bombs released in a dive cause double damage to ground targets. I've found this extremely useful when using what are a pair of very good bombs anyway. And certainly if I'm over, for instance, a military base, I'm pretty much going to take out the entirety of a special object in a steep dive with my bombs, if I can get fast enough and get a steep enough angle, which I don't find hard in this aircraft. Actually, technically, what tends to happen is you get one of those pesky tents at the corner of the object left behind and you have to turn around and shoot it out. But even so, to take out almost the entirety of the special object and then finish it off like that means that flipping a sector with your bombs is so much easier. And, of course, Mary Loveheart also comes with Eagle's Wings, which increases the engine thrust by 2% and boost duration by 10%. Hence, I've just realised why I've got 24 seconds, even though I've put on equipment that damages the availability of boost. So Mary Loveheart is an excellent pilot to put in here. However, these skills can't be demounted, which means that you have to work pretty hard to get more skills on her. And if I were putting her specifically on this aircraft, I probably wouldn't have chosen aerodynamics expert here. I would probably drop the eagle-eyed skill and the aerodynamic. Sorry, I said aerodynamics. I did mean aerobatics. Keep the aerodynamics skill, just to be clear. I'd probably drop these 2 skills and put it on Engine Guru 2. And then, and only then, would I probably start working my way along the machine Marksman 1 and Marksman 2 skills. That's if I didn't decide to put on one of my favourite skills, Resilience. And If you find that the aircraft is sluggish, particularly if you've mounted the boost injection mixture system and the lightweight power unit but not an uprated engine, you have also got the option of this skill here, the cruise flight, which not only increases the view range by 20%, but also increases the engine thrust and top speed by 3% when the aircraft has not been damaged for 20 seconds. So, your choices for pilot skills are quite complicated and very dependent on what equipment you mount. Well, that discussion of pilot skills, equipment choices and consumables, I think makes this one of the more challenging aircraft to set up. In the game, you're going to have to decide how you want to fly the aircraft and then pick your equipment and your pilot skills to maximise the potential of that choice. Okay, I think it's time to move on and see how the aircraft performs in battle. So the map for this battle is Alpine Gambit. It's the narrow pass variant, a 5-sector map with the sectors laid out in the familiar 5 spots of a die configuration. In the centre we have a military base, which therefore tactically is the most important sector because it allows easy access to all the other sectors. But strategically, it's also the most important sector on the map because it will launch rocket strikes against other sectors and try and flip them to you, which, if your team doesn't go to those sectors and die incessantly, it will do. It's flanked by 4 garrisons, which are the make-weights in the game, and the way to win this map is to, at all costs, hold that military base for longer than the enemy, and probably your 2 local garrisons, and if you manage to do that, the military base will almost certainly flip, maybe not for the entirety of the game, but certainly for part of it, the enemy's garrisons to you. If we look at the order of battle, we can see I'm bottom tier in my P-38L. We have an F-7F Tiger Cat, a tier 7 aircraft, the American Tetri Heavy, and also a Dornier 217M bomber, a tier 6. The enemy has 3 tier 6 aircraft, a Mustang 1. I can fly above it, but if I get engaged by it at its altitude, those guns will do some fairly good damage to me, even with the buff to the 50 cals that this has recently experienced. An LA-5, which is a fairly handy fighter, but shouldn't cause me any problems. One I will have to look out for and definitely not go head-on with is the ME-410. Let's have a look and see how this battle panned out. So, as we go into battle, this is a natively recorded replay file. It's not one of the World of Warplanes team's files. That means that the gun sight or reticle will be properly aimed, hurrah, but the movement may be a bit more jerky. So, the military base is by far and away the most important sector. That's where we're going straight away. Military bases are only defended by 2 air defence heavies, so we'll be looking for them, and of course we'll need to weave to avoid the anti-aircraft fire as well. Have a little practice with the sniping mode there. There's the first of them. I want to see what the second one is doing before I commit. And in fact they're concentrating on the Tiger Cat, which has got into the sector long before I have. And that allows me to line up the heavily damaged heavy. That's dead. I'm swinging for the second one, but I think the Tiger Cat's got him. And now we're going into a steep, fast dive. We're going to exploit Valkyrie's Wrath. The skill for Mary Loveheart, the pilot. Drop the 2 bombs, and what happens? Wait for it. There you go. I've taken out the entirety of the special object with the 2 bombs using that skill on the pilot, and now I can go for the ground attacker. Swing up and round. And he's actually down, so it's swing up and just keep going. And we're going to use the excellent climb speed to try and get to this B-17G. Now notice I've lost 40% of my health here, mostly to the anti-aircraft fire. This aircraft is not resilient, which makes going after a B-17G a bit of a worry. And I'm glad I've got the extra DPS that the gas-operated action confers. And down he goes. At that moment I spot another bomber coming in, which turns out to be another B-17G. Pump shots into him, trying to do as much damage as I can before I go past him. Try and throw off the aim by going up. He's beginning to shoot me now, so I want to speed in and shoot him as quickly as possible. And down that goes. What's behind me? Turns out to be a multi-role. It's not paying me any attention initially, but then swings towards me. It's got a nasty gun, the J4M. I don't really want to go head on with this. So I begin to evade. Fortunately, I've taken out his engine, so he's now wallowing. He becomes an easy target. And that's my fourth victim. And that lines me up nicely on the Soviet aircraft. Fly away from it, having hit it. Now turn to swoop down on it again. And that's not... I'm not sure that's the same aircraft. I fire a rocket at that IL-1 because that's got really good guns. I didn't want it to keep on going at me. So I didn't expect to hit it with the rocket. I just wanted to dissuade it from going head on with me. Now we found the ME-410, and once I'm on his tail, he's basically toast. Down he goes. Find another heavy flying across me. I want to get this one out because it's more manoeuvrable than I am. The moment I begin to shoot it, it tries to turn. Fortunately, I've got the right angle to keep on firing shots into it and destroy it. And now I can chase down the bomber if I so choose. Help the air defence aircraft finish him off. Take the kill. I'm sure the air defence aircraft won't mind. Turn back, and there's the other bomber. Still on the half health, not doing too badly considering how many times I've gone for these bombers. They've had other things to shoot at, which is fortunate for me, otherwise I might have considerably less health at this point. And there goes the pilot, and I'm glad I've got a first aid kit, because I don't want to have an injured pilot when I'm addressing one of these. Pop the pilot back in and finish the bomber off, and that's already the Maguire's medal. 400 points in a single sortie in a heavy fighter. Now what can we do? Team is well on top, we're 4 sectors to 1 up, but there's a long way to go in this battle, can't relax. So we now head for the ground attacker. Now, I wouldn't be as confident about doing this kind of work if I didn't have that extra DPS that I mentioned. That's the ground attacker down. And I remind you that the class-specific mission, if you pause the video or go back, you'll see what it was. It involves taking out bombers and ground attackers. I've now got 5 of them. We've established superiority. Racing along the map because I know there was a bomber up here somewhere and I want to find it. It's disappeared for the moment. And then I realise there's another one coming in behind me. Be easier to shoot this one. And again, it's a team effort here, which means that the bomber's not just got me to think about shooting, but also the other aircraft. And that earns me the Hero of the Sky. And then I'm set on fire because finally my luck has run out and the ME-410 has got behind me. And there we go. Quick fire battle. Only 6 minutes. Maguire's medal, Hero of the Sky, and 13,500 personal points. Let's take a look at the outcome of this battle, and as we can see from the centre, it's a 5 chevron battle, or a grade 1 heavy fighter. That grossed 138,504 credits, or silver if you prefer. Just over 46,000 of that came from the premium account bonus. Just drop into the message box. We can see that there were repair costs of 4,000 credits for losing the aircraft right at the end there. No expenses for consumables, they were prepaid. Aircraft experience 4,340, the base 1,702, premium account bonus of 850 or thereabouts, bonuses from livery etc. Of 1,784, 868 for experience. Don't get too carried away. I had boosters running. You can see the base there is only 174 and the premium account bonus 42. The rest of it is coming from bonuses from boosters. No tokens on this occasion, but we can see a Maguire's medal here and also a Hero of the Sky badge. On the personal score tab, we can see that one of the 3 class-specific missions was complete, that for capture points received. However, the other 2 were 4/5 complete. That gave me enough points for the 5 chevron battle. Only 13,530 personal points, 1 sector captured, which of course was the central military base, 11 aerial targets destroyed, mostly concentrated on bombers there, a couple of one attack aircraft as well. And of course, I'm mentioning those because there's the class-specific mission. I'm going to find it quite difficult to do this particular mission in this aircraft with its relatively light armament. 7,771 damage to aerial targets with 31 critical hits, quite a high number coming off that cannon. Lost the aircraft right at the end, just the once. 480 capture points, that was divided 360 for defending, 120 for attacking. Just the one ground target destroyed, but it was an important one, the special object in the military base, and that yielded 8,008 damage. Turning to the team score tab, we can see that was enough for first place, both by chevrons and by personal points. Nice contribution from the tier 7 Tiger Cat here, 10,000. The bomber had a rough game, that's for sure. Probably set upon by something or other. Mustang won the top on the enemy team. So, not too challenging a battle, but illustrative of what the plane can do in the right circumstances. That brings me to the end of my look at the new reward aircraft, the P-38L Lightning. And the good news is, it's not overpowered. Yes, good players will do well in it, but then they'll do well in any aircraft. Above average players like me will occasionally have decent games in this plane. Newer players are likely to find it quite difficult. You need to have a fair bit of tactical nous in order to get the best out of this aircraft. I advise you to think hard about your combination of equipment, consumable and pilot skills, and make sure you set the aircraft up in the way that you want to fly it. That makes it a challenging aircraft, and I for one welcome that. Well, I hope you found that useful, and that if you did, you'll come and see my future content. But until then, this is the Noble Q, signing out.